But they're very direct costs that come into play as soon as you launch the boat. Sitting in the boatyard on the trailer, it's not costing you anything apart from the fact it's just getting older and the boatyard fees. But as soon as you're going to take a trip, you know that there are certain costs that you're going to incur. And those are basically your cost of sales in the service industry. And let's summarize those costs of sales. The very first thing that you're going to use on your boat trip is fuel to power the engines. And let's just say your boat has got 4 250 horsepower motors on it, and you're going to go out for 2 hours. My estimate is that you're using about 10 liters of fuel per hour per 100 horsepower of outboard motor that you're sitting with. If you had 4 250 horse motors, that's 1,000 horsepower. And every 100 horsepower is using 10 liters per hour. So that would be 100 liters of fuel per hour times by 2 hours would be 200 liters of fuel. Now, obviously, it depends on your country how much fuel costs you per liter, and our country is quite expensive. That's your very first cost that you know you're going to incur on this boat trip. And your second cost, and I believe in this particular industry, all of these are direct costs of sales because you don't have to spend that money unless you want to make the trip with these paying passengers. Your second major cost would be the crew. So you need a skipper, obviously, to drive the boat around, and you pay the skipper a certain amount of money. And then you're going to need crew on your boat. They're doing things like helping you launch and helping you recover. They're helping you get onto your moorings and off your moorings. They're loading stuff onto and off the boat. But then they're also helping you, if you're doing shark cage diving, say to get that shark cage into the water to the one side of the boat when you got to the place where you want to be. So your crew are quite busy. You have to have crew. Also, crew are safety officers. If something bad happened to your boat and it started sinking or something like that, your crew are the people that need to know how to launch the life rafts, things like that. So running a boat is actually very similar to running a commercial aircraft, like a jet that most of us fly on from time to time. Very similar. All of your cabin crew, their first job is actually safety officers. Their second job is to give you your a drink or a meal or whatever it is. So obviously all of those crew costs come into play immediately you decide to make the trip. Now, if you're charging each person, each passenger that you're taking out on the boat $100 for the ride, your first, let's say 4 passengers might be paying for the fuel. And your next 6 passengers might be paying for the crew. So with 10 passengers on board, and let's bear in mind we're talking a bigger boat and it can take 40 people. Let's say your first 10 passengers are just paying for those 2 costs, is your fuel and your crew. With boats and aircraft, you've got a third major expense. Boats and aircraft both work the same way, is that your engines work on hours, not distance like a motor vehicle, they work on hours. So however many hours an engine is done determines when its next service is due. And on boats, your maintenance is quite high with these engines. So you've got to take a third factor into account. which is the cost of maintenance of your engines. Because you'll have, for instance, say minor services at 100 hours and a major service at 1,000 hours. And so you have to factor in, you're going to go out for 2 hours. So each engine is going to get 2 hours time on it. You have to factor in as well what your service costs are. And you have to cover that cost to reach a break-even point before allowing your boat to go out to sea. And let's just say, again, my numbers are estimates. It takes another 2 people paying $100 each to pay for that service cost, which is going to come up on a regular basis. So let's say so far is you've got 10 people, 10 people to cover the fuel and the crew, and another 2 people to pay for the maintenance. You might put a third person in just to pay for general boat maintenance. You've got to get your life rafts serviced. There's always work on boats. But at 12 or 13 people, you're on a completely break-even point. That if you send your boat out to do a trip, yes, it's paid for everything that needs to be paid for, but it hasn't put any money into your pocket. You've got quite a fair bit of money that's sitting in the bank, but like I've just said, it hasn't really put any money into your pocket. So you might make that decision if you run a business like this, that your minimum number is 20 people. So the last 7, 6 people, whatever it is, are actually making some money for you as owner that you can put in your pocket. So you might cut off and say, I won't send the boat out unless it's got 20 people. End of story. Unless you've got special arrangements for, but that's your basic rule of your business. But these boats have been going out full. They've been going out with 40 people. And all of those people, that's pure profit basically, that's going in. Right, it's the time of the year right now where it is whale watching season. But I've been gobsmacked, to be quite honest, is just to see in such a small little place as how many buses arrive. These operators have got their own minibuses. People come in their private vehicles or hired vehicles, overseas tourists. It's absolutely amazing. And the one thing that happens in this part of the world is the wind blows. The Cape, and everybody will think of Cape Point, was always known as the Cape of Storms. The Cape Agulhas, which is 60 kilometers to the southeast, the wind blows there just as much, possibly more, than Cape Point. I think the whole area in the old days was called Cape of Storms. And the one thing that you have to run this business is a boat that can go out there and take the wind. And I would say the cutoff point from me watching would be about 30 knots. They might get caught out on the ocean and the wind starts blowing harder than 30 knots, but I don't think they launch harder than 30 knots. But 30 knots is quite a lot of wind to launch a boat out. And so these boats are quite tough. And they're purpose-built. Some of them are really purpose-built for the business, the aluminium. The aluminium is always a better boat to have when you're playing next to rocks and things like that, because you hit something with fiberglass, it's quite difficult to fix it, whereas aluminium is much easier. Anyway, that was just to give you an overview of sort of how the shark cage and whale watching story happens. There's one thing that I haven't mentioned. There's another cost. And it could be quite big. I've got no idea what it is. It's dependent on numbers. It's dependent on marketing. And I assume that every single operator here pays the big tourist companies, the big bus companies, the big hotels in Cape Town a kickback to get the tourists to come out here for the day and go for a boat ride. So that is a cost that I just haven't mentioned. But like I said, I've got an idea. But it's a very good business. All right. Thank you for listening.